Welcome everybody. So we're live, and today is our fourth The New Landscape of Growth webinar. Really excited to have this opportunity today for us to have Josh with us, and I will introduce Josh more properly in a moment. Let me just share my screen. So you will know that this is our fourth episode. We have been, and this episode is going to be focused on defensibility and marketplaces. And with me today there is my usual co-host in these conversations and co-conspirator Manfredi. Hello, Manfredi, and Josh Breinlinger is the founding partner and let's say the main animator of Tartar Ventures, but also co-founder of oDesk and Rev.com, and a former board member of Crexi, Alto Pharmacy, and Contently, and tons of years of experience in this space that we will try to make available to our community today. So Josh, thanks very much for coming.
Thanks for having me. Good morning or good evening, everyone. Excited to be here.
Thank you so much. So just quickly, again, let's remind a little bit why we're doing this. This research that we have been running through most of the 2021 so far has been producing 6 research updates that our listeners can check on our blog, stories, platformdesigntooolkit.com, where you can also find all the webinars. And essentially why we're doing this is because we believe that marketplaces and platforms are pervasive. These are going to be mechanisms and frameworks that everybody needs to use, because it's just so important to use and leverage these mechanisms to organize businesses, institutions, and new ventures alike. So we are trying to distill the extensive body of knowledge in growth and network effects and defensibility in more actionable and easy to use frameworks, as we did so far for 7 years now with the Platform Design Toolkit and our exploration guides, with a new growth guide that is supposed to come later on in the fall. I will tell you more later. Just a little bit so far of recap. So far we had James Currier in March as the opening event. Then we had Ed Baker, Fabio Floris, and Tommy Forstrom for the second episode that was more like an insider view. And lastly, a few weeks ago in May, we had Yara Paoli and Craig Zingerlin for the third episode. That was super fun and really great. So I really encourage you to catch up with the old webinars. So now today we joined by Josh, and I'm gonna without further ado leave the floor to Manfredi to kick off this great conversation.
Thanks, Simone, and hello everyone. It's really great to have Josh. I met him in Berlin at the Marketplace conference, and I think few people have the experience he does in marketplaces. Probably the best way to start, Josh, is why don't you tell us kind of what you've been up to and what you're doing now?
For sure, yeah. Marketplaces are obviously my favorite topic. So I've been living and breathing marketplaces for the last 17 years now. So yeah, thank you all. I'm Josh. Once upon a time, I was a mechanical engineer and used to build real stuff like fuel injectors, but that's sort of ancient history now. And in 2004, I was on the founding team at oDesk, which hopefully many of you know. Now you know it as Upwork. It's public, largest freelance labor marketplace in the world. And I was there for about a little over 5 years. And that was my crash course in learning about marketplaces and flywheels and virtuous cycles and sometimes vicious cycles. And I was extremely fortunate. I got to do a little bit of everything there. So initially I was running sales, and then product, community, operations, marketing, biz dev, really almost everything on the business side of the marketplace. Certainly made tons of mistakes and try to help founders avoid those mistakes now. fast forward, I moved on, went to a company called AdRoll and display advertising briefly, very quickly realized I like marketplaces a lot more than ad tech, and helped co-found a company called Rev, which is in the audio transcription space and speech recognition space. And then for the last 10 years have been in venture capital investing in marketplaces. So most of that time was with Jackson Square Ventures. I was a general partner there for the last 5 years. And as you said, all marketplaces, things like Alto Pharmacy, OfferUp, Crexi, very broad, both consumer and business, but all marketplaces of some sort. And most recently, I stepped down in 2020, and I'm in the process of raising my own fund, Turtle Ventures. Hey, Kenny. Raising my own fund, Turtle Ventures, which is going to be focused on finding turtles, which I think of as a great analogy for marketplaces because they're highly defensible and they basically live forever. Turtles are one of the longest living species on Earth. So they found one that was 256 years old. And ultimately, that's what a great marketplace is. It's extremely defensible. And if you get the flywheels right, you should be able to effectively grow forever, market size allowing.
Mm-hmm. Right. And as kind of Simone mentioned at the beginning, this mini series of webinars is effectively about marketplaces and defensibility. And so I contacted you like right at the beginning, saying, can you join us at the end? Because like it was just a perfect match, and partly because we think that actually we've seen some marketplaces that maybe they're not actually that defensible. So some mistakes are made along the way that make them kind of weaker, and so we've also seen some venture capitalists invest a lot of money in marketplaces that don't actually create that amazing network effect and kind of deliver that winner-take-all scenario that initially we thought every single marketplace would achieve, right? Network effects. So I guess kind of marketplaces face different challenges at different stages. In your experiences, what are the key challenges that they face at different stages in their lives?
Yeah. Well, so I'm glad you brought this up. And I think the first thing, you talk about VCs making mistakes, investing in the wrong things that aren't really defensible. I think there's some industries or markets where a marketplace does not make sense. And I always hate to do this because I run the risk of talking to a founder that's working on this. But, take locksmiths. This is my classic example. A marketplace for locksmiths basically makes no sense. It's a reasonably sized industry, but there's just not much to improve. It's too infrequent of a transaction. It's too low price of a transaction. And nobody sits around saying, oh my gosh, it's so inefficient and horrible to find a locksmith. So it doesn't make sense. You might address it through a horizontal platform like Thumbtack or something like that, but there's a lot to picking the right market in the first place. And the way I think about this is your North Star, the reason a marketplace should exist is to improve efficiency. That's it to me, right? So find a massive existing market. Right? There's some certainly new markets, but in general, I like massive existing markets where there are just massive amounts of inefficiency. And we're all in startups, so we're not exposed to this as much. But you go to any big business, there's still people pushing paper around and, searching constantly, getting quotes, even just hiring. You post a job, you get 100 candidates, you go through all these interviews. It's wildly inefficient. And so if a marketplace can come along and dramatically improve the efficiency of getting a high quality transaction done, then they have a great reason to exist. And they can build the flywheel are these compounding improvements in efficiency as they get more and more scale, more and more data, all these great things. So I think that's where people make a lot of the big mistakes is just choosing the wrong markets in the first place.
Right. Yes, that makes sense. And I like how you said, ultimately the goal is to improve the market itself, right? It's not to create something new, but to enable the market.
Yeah. I mean, my belief is that the vast majority of really big marketplace success stories were just efficiency improvements over a big incumbent, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, take Blockbuster to Netflix. It was just a better delivery model. That's it.
Yeah.
And they took off.
And then I guess sometimes technology allows for that efficiency shift to happen, and therefore a new nature of marketplace happens that could be allowing for, I guess, bundling or unbundling of different assets.
That's right. That's right.
So can we say that it's like, you know, more that the fact that the internet is pervading everything we do, and it leaves us there with increasingly markets being made of independent players interacting, so moving away from the industrial, let's say, model into more networks, swarming networks of players that interact with each other, and you know, basically leaving us with the need to make these experiences that are cumbersome now available to the people in the entities in the ecosystems trying to interact, you know, leaving this opportunity for us to rebundle, let's say, defragment these otherwise very fragmented so experiences. So the point I'm raising here is like, you know, everything is a marketplace, and which is more or less the point that we are raising, is that the world is moving towards low transaction cost and producers and consuming interacting directly without any industrial middleman. And so that's the marketplace opportunity, right?
For sure. I mean, this is what the internet was designed for, right? And, you know, it's funny to me, there's so many industries that you talk to and you ask, like, okay, you know, how do you find a plumber, whatever. And to this day, most people like ask a friend. And it's kind of insane to think that that's the best approach, right? With all the data and all the service providers and all the goods in the world, it's absolutely insane to think that your tiny little network has access to the best available resources. Mm-hmm. And the challenge of the marketplaces is collecting all those users, all the goods, all the data to make matches really efficient and to make transaction costs, as you said, go down and down and down. And that's the promise of all these things. And you know, I have LPs that I talk to that some of them think, you know, oh, hey, haven't all the good marketplaces been done already? And I just think that's crazy. I see no end to the opportunities. You know, you know, if you went around and every single transaction in your personal and business life was unbelievably smooth and never frustrating, okay, maybe we're done, but that's just not the case, right? So I think there's no end to these opportunities. And there's also, as you said, new technologies that sort of leapfrog. And, you know, Netflix, right? Initially it was delivery through the post office, and then streaming came along. Mm-hmm. And who knows what's next? I don't know, augmented reality, virtual reality, implantable brain chips, who knows? Yeah. New platforms will come along.
Yeah. And I must say, so I've done this exercise a couple of times with Simone, using a kind of ecosystem exploration guide that he's designed together with other tools. And literally, we can take today any single market, explore the pattern of value creation and disruption, and design what would be a marketplace with network effects within pretty much any ecosystem out there. Sometimes you have to go downstream, sometimes upstream, but there's always potential for disruption. And so let's take this then kind of one layer deeper. So somebody goes through that exercise, has an idea, finds the potential for the right marketplace, then they have to make it happen, right? And the execution isn't simple, as we know. So what's the key challenge you find that marketplaces face when they start?
Yeah. So initially, everybody thinks about the chicken and the egg problem, or the cold start problem, or whatever we want to call it. So I think of it as basically, I call it liquidity hacking. You know, the initial goal, once you've figured out what you're going to go after, it's figure out how to get initial liquidity, and that's all that matters, right? And you know, that's defined slightly differently depending on the marketplace. You know, for oDesk, it was a ratio of jobs filled divided by jobs posted, right? So, you know, 100 jobs are posted, how many people are hired? That was our liquidity. And, you know, what we found pretty quickly is there was sort of an optimal point, right? Like if you got 0 candidates, obviously that was no good, but 1 and 2 and 3 were also not very good. And then on the extreme scale, if you got 100 or 200 candidates, that was also really bad, because everybody's just like, oh my God, too much. I don't know what to do. And so the optimal point is somewhere in the middle, but it's all about liquidity hacking. And, you know, I generally think the best is the, I believe it's a Paul Graham quote, the do things that don't scale. And that's exactly what we did at oDesk. So way back when anyone wanted to post a job on oDesk, they literally called my cell phone and be like, all right, I need some programmers. And the thing that didn't scale is that I had, it was 2004, so forgive me, but I had a Yahoo Messenger list of every single freelancer in the entire network. And I would be on the phone and just see who's online right now and start like half a dozen chats with people and tell them about the job, you know, see if they're a good fit, see if they're interested. And then while I'm still on the phone, I would start matching people. It's like, okay, I'm sending you an email intro. They're online right now. They can chat right now about your project. And that real time matching was just unbelievably effective. And obviously it doesn't scale, right? But that's what got us going. And, you know, we built up a team of about half a dozen. We were recruiters, really, but for the freelance world. And then, you know, eventually, of course, we built all the automated algorithms and matching and everything else. But initially, it was very, very manual. So I think a lot of people can do that. The other main strategy is just absurdly narrow focus. And, you know, I led the Series A and OfferUp back in 2013. Many of you probably know it's one of the largest mobile classified marketplaces in the US, very routinely a top, you know, two or three shopping app just behind Amazon. But, you know, today they're in everywhere in the country, every possible category, every demographic. But initially, it was just in a few zip codes, literally down to the zip code. Where, like, remember, you can do zip code level advertising now. And it was only for new moms, because if anybody has kids, you know, you're going through strollers and car seats and everything like that, and you have to turn them over every 3 months. So we found a really high frequency category with a very active community and an unbelievably narrow geographic focus. And that's what allowed us to get the initial traction, because for a while, it just wasn't working, right? You get a few posts and there's no buyers. And of course, if somebody posts a bunch of items and nothing sells, well, they're not going to come back. And that's the hardest part of getting things started. And you know, the way you do that is just really, really targeted advertising in many cases. And most people are way too broad when they start.
Right. And can I jump in just quickly, Manfredi, and especially on this, if you can double click in this geographic element, you know, this, I think you spoke about this zip code. I think when we speak about marketplaces, sometimes we don't appreciate, I think, the difference between the location sensitive marketplaces. And this seems to be also very important when it comes to long-term sustainability of the marketplace. So I don't know, maybe you can expand a little bit. I'm also interested in, for example, in your work as an advisor of companies like Crexi that has this very local footprint. So what is your feeling, you know, especially in thinking about, you know, I go through the first challenges, I got the liquidity, but then sometimes, even in the long term, these marketplaces are just not really sustainable from a unit economics perspective. Often these ones that have a strong geographic footprint.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's varying levels of challenges, right? So Alto Pharmacy is a fantastic company. I also led the Series A several years ago. and it's geographic focused, but we can serve a 50-mile radius, and so that works pretty well, right? If the really, really hyper local ones are frankly much harder, but I do think they can be very sustainable, and you just need to monitor the market penetration of each geo very carefully. And I find usually there's some sort of tipping point where you get to a certain amount of market penetration where then it's on autopilot and then takes on a life of its own. And I've just seen that time and time again, and I'm sure it's different for every single marketplace, but if you can find that tipping point where it becomes more organic growth, it becomes more positive net spend retention, then it's absolutely sustainable.
Even if there's no spillover between different geographies, do you think it's still so? For example, we know that the story of Airbnb, launched by cities, but with this side of the marketplace, the traveler, there was this agent of spillover of growth. So sometimes instead, if I think about the plumbers, there's no real spillover, neither for the client or the actual provider. So even in this case, you think that at some point you have maybe word of mouth that just takes over?
I certainly believe so. I think the number one metric VCs look for in SaaS companies is net spend retention, right? So the best companies, the highest multiple SaaS companies all have like 120, 130, 140% net spend retention. So no new customers, you're still growing. And it's actually very similar in marketplaces. And you can think of it the exact same way of like net dollar retention of a cohort. And what I've seen a lot of times is these cohorts have this sort of shape where they start high, they lose a bunch. And so maybe the first few months actually don't look that good. But then you convert some percentage of your users into like the true believers, the true fans, the loyal customers. And that once it dips down, it starts recovering and goes up from there. And so that you're going to lose some initial percentage of your users, but as long as you have a great marketplace, good liquidity, after a few months they'll start growing. And that's exactly what we saw at oDesk in the early days, right? Some people would just come in and do a logo and they'd be gone, fine. But then other people would hire one person and they're like, this is great, I'm going to hire 3 more people and then 10 more people and I'm going to keep them full time forever. And that's what you need to build that sustainability.
So, okay, tough question. If we look at Uber, for example, huge, massive scale, yet, again, very geospecific, local network effect. In some cities, it struggles with competition, regardless of what do you see there happening? What's the solution? I mean, arguably, Uber, hasn't maybe yet been a complete success, even if, some investors have invested a lot in it.
Calling it a 90 billion failure. So I'm a big fan of Uber. I think what they've done is quite remarkable. But I do think they need to keep pushing the envelope. And, remember the history, it was Uber Black initially, and which was okay, but not like an everyday service. And then it was Uber X, and then it really started taking off. And then it was more the, ride sharing Uber Pool that took it to the next level, which was, oh my gosh, now it's better, faster, and it's way cheaper than any other alternative. And I do think they're going to need to keep pushing the envelope. And, one way they can make it cheaper is leveraging their delivery network for other things like grocery delivery, which is, Corner Shop is one of the Jackson Square Ventures companies that Uber's acquired. And so they need to keep pushing those things to drive the metrics, which are, effectively driver earning power and efficiency. It's back to efficiency, right? You're driving around and, if you can do 3 deliveries or 3 riders an hour, can you get it to 4? Can you get it to 5? And if you can keep pushing that, you'll keep winning. But certainly the world doesn't stand still, and lots of other competitors are nipping at all the edges.
Absolutely. And then later on, once a marketplace reaches scale, then what do you see as the main challenges there?
Yeah, so this is something I think about a ton, and it's all about understanding and fostering a flywheel. And I think of it as the virtuous cycle of quality. And I'll sort of use the labor marketplace example because I know it really well, and it's a little easier. But I think of it as you have this flywheel of, first you need to attract great people, screen to make sure you have 100 people coming in. What are the 50 that we should let in? And then, and this is where it really matters, you need to optimize who gets what work.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is one of the biggest things. And we'll get back to that in just a second. So attract, screen, optimize, make sure you're retaining the best people, and make sure you're also expelling the worst people, right? Mm-hmm. If they're creating bad experiences in the marketplace, you get them out. And later we'll talk about there's a training element that's starting to become much more interesting. But that's how I think of that flywheel. And the mistakes that people can make is, first of all, if you're not getting the bad actors out of the marketplace, it just creates a degrading experience where generally the best people start leaving. And even Amazon, which obviously I'm an Amazon super fan, absolutely incredible, but increasingly I have more and more negative experiences. It's just people selling garbage. I've heard stats that it's 30% fake reviews, maybe more. Nobody really knows. And so it's so hard to maintain that virtuous cycle because people will attack it. People will attack. If anywhere there's money to be made, people are going to start attacking. So make sure you can figure out how to identify the bad actors, which is hard enough, and then get them out. And then also retaining people. In general, you need to provide a phenomenal experience for sellers on your platform. Otherwise, the best ones are going to leave, right? And a lot of that is about career path and increase earnings and things like that. Unfortunately, in Uber's case, there's not a ton of upward mobility, right? You kind of tap out pretty quick. If they could figure out how to create more, that would be amazing. And I'm sure their retention would skyrocket. Fun fact, by the way, doing really fast guaranteed payments is number one by a mile in terms of provider satisfaction. So fun fact. But let's talk about the optimized piece, because this I think is where marketplaces really have so much power, right? So Rev, where I'm on the board, does just a phenomenal job of understanding when a job comes in of, okay, this podcast needs to get transcribed. Who should do it? Who should do that work? Now, most marketplaces 10 years ago, it was kind of like a free-for-all. Like, okay, here's a job. Anybody can see it. Anybody can take it or apply for it or claim the job. Well, that's obviously not really the best solution. That leads to a lot of wasted energy. It's not an ideal match. And there's so much more you can do. So the first thing you can do is start tiering people of, like, I know Manfredi is fantastic, so I'm going to put him in tier 1, and he has early access to jobs that he might want. That's one thing you can do. And Faber Connect, temp staffing for construction company that I invested in, does a really, really nice job of this as well. So a lot of that is, first, it's about tiering. And then the next thing you really need to understand, in order to do that tiering, you really need to understand quality very well of, is Manfredi really great or not? And most people just use 1 to 5 star feedback systems, which I hate, because it doesn't create like real quality. Quality in the real world looks like a normal curve, right? Most are somewhat average, some are exceptional, some are bad. That's what the real world looks like. Well, any marketplace online with one of these standard systems has a distribution that's a few 1 stars, no 2s, no 3s, almost no 4s, and all 5s. So you're not getting any real picture of quality. All those systems do is help you identify the bad stuff. They don't really help you identify the good stuff. And that's where people need to use different systems. And this is, I think, one of the biggest opportunities for new marketplaces is we have so much data. Think of what TikTok does, right? TikTok tracks every single thing you do. They track how fast you're swiping, right? How long you're lagging, everything. I don't even know the half of it, obviously. But marketplaces are usually just looking at 1 to 5 stars. We're not looking at, okay, they saw 5 people. Who did they pick? What about the other 4? Should they go down in rank? Should the one they picked go up in rank? What about return rates? Or even, I heard one of the coolest quality signals I heard about was just the response rate to the 5-star question. Some people find that's actually more indicative of quality than the rating itself. So to give you an example, okay, so I buy this coffee mug, right? And it's a 10% response rate, 5 stars. Okay. Now, I buy some other mug and it's a 90% response rate, also 5 stars. Right. Well, the 90% response rate is obviously way better. People are willing to click the link and spend their time to say, yes, this is an awesome product. And so the opportunity is just finding new signals. There's so many. And I'm sure it's unique to all sorts of different marketplaces, but there are so many more signals that you can use to identify the quality and then make sure you really use it. Make sure that the best items, the best people are getting tons of work, lots of orders on the platform. It's going to make everybody's experience way better. So I really think it's all about understanding that flywheel. And I think Sarah Tavel did a really nice piece on this in her hierarchy of marketplaces. It's sort of understanding your happy path transactions, right? Where everything goes well and everybody's happy. And, initially maybe you only have like 50% happy transactions, but over time, your goal should be to get that percentage higher and higher and higher. And that's what all of this quality stuff is about.
Right. And I mean, I like also the concept that, the good actors in a platform can get better. And so I see that particularly around kind of labor marketplaces, how, these platforms don't just become an opportunity to make some money, but offer a career path to people, which then kind of also partly redefines the role marketplaces have in society, right? Which is huge. Very interesting topic.
I just invested in a company called Nana Home, which is, from the outside, it's very simple. It's appliance repair. Okay. Easy enough. But what they found is an imbalance. First of all, there's an imbalance of supply and demand, right? There's a lot of demand for this sort of stuff, but there's just not that many qualified people. And likewise, it's similar in lots of different construction type industries. The entry level maybe is close to minimum wage. It's, what are we at? $15 an hour now. But you learn a few skills. You learn how to fix some more complicated things. You can get 20, 30, 40, 50, if you get to be a really, really good carpenter, you can be making hundreds of dollars per hour. And so, but there's a failure in most of society in training towards those things. Most people need to really just be completely self-motivated and also have the resources, cash to pay for training or get lucky and find some great apprentice or mentor. And so marketplaces can fill that role and do way more training and provide real paths to growth and a career. And I think that's going to be one of the most exciting things, especially in labor marketplaces.
Yeah, I know. It's very funny also because I guess in doing that, they partly solve the quality challenge, right? Because by offering the training, then they know that people coming in should be at a certain level, and it's kind of, it works on multiple levels. That's pretty interesting. Going back a stage, so all right, we talked about liquidity hacking. You spoke about the metric you use at oDesk, and I believe that in every marketplace, you optimize to ultimately one metric or a North Star metric that generally joins supply and demand, right? Involves both, is some kind of match rate, right? Which will massively vary depending on the sector and the nature of the marketplace. And so effectively, you're always kind of doing a balancing act between kind of more demand, more supply, more demand. Is that kind of how it works at every single stage? You're constantly kind of more advertising, more acquisition on this side, increase retention on this side, so that is that kind of
it never
ongoing,
ends.
ever-ending challenge?
It's a never-ending challenge for sure.
Mm-hmm.
The thing I'll say about setting some KPIs and goals is you can create incentives that break your marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
And I hate to pick on oDesk, but if my goal was just, hey, increase the number of freelancers, it's like, okay, well, that's easy. Go to job forums and job boards in India, Philippines, Bangladesh, Kenya, anywhere, and just spam job posts like crazy. I can get as many people as you want, no problem. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't do any good, right? That destroys the marketplace. And so it's so important to have both a quality and a quantity metric in the KPI. And so, and again, I don't have some magic formula. I think it's different for everybody, but there has to be what you really want to do is grow the qualified freelancers or the good coffee mugs or the 5-star phones. You have to figure out something that combines both those elements of quality and quantity. Mm-hmm. And if it's just quantity, I think you're in serious trouble.
But is it fair to say that it is useful to have an emergency lever for quantity sometimes, where you can just kind of pull it and then it kind of comes into rescue if needed for a short-term solution, right? It seems like that's what you're hinting. Okay, that's good.
So for sure, right? Like everybody needs to have that lever. Otherwise, mm-hmm. you have no control. But then the most important thing is okay, so if you can pull that lever and everything floods in, then you just need a really good system around optimizing and expelling the bad stuff and keeping the good stuff. If you don't have a really good system there, it'll break. And that's when things get ugly.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then you also said kind of something else that was very interesting, I thought, which is that single metric will depend on every marketplace. It's different for every marketplace. And so effectively, what we're saying is that every single marketplace is different and works differently, even if they're in the same kind of country, in the same sector sometimes. Fair to say?
Yeah, I certainly haven't found a golden rule yet, and I've been involved in a lot of marketplaces. So yeah, I think everything is going to be different. I guess the closest thing I've found to kind of a unifying principle, but a lot of people don't like it, is actually Net Promoter Score. I'm sure a ton of people here use Net Promoter Score. To me, it's as close as I found to a unifying principle of whatever it is. If the sellers are high NPS and if the buyers are high NPS, you're doing something right. And so do more of that. And you see it, obviously. A lot of the satisfaction with the marketplace depends on the other users or goods that you're interacting with, right? It's not about the pretty web design or pretty mobile app. It's about what was the end experience. Did I post something for sale and offer up, and did it sell in 2 hours? That's an amazing experience. That's what matters. The liquidity is the product, and so that creates happy customers and gets the whole flywheel going.
Yeah. And so at the start you said kind of what type of marketplaces or kind of turtles you like to invest in. What are the kind of trends you've seen recently? What got you excited recently?
Well, let's see. So I definitely like these on the labor marketplace side. I think the most obvious opportunity is more of these kind of training oriented marketplaces. Nana Home is doing it with appliance repair. Faber Connect is doing some of it with construction. I think there's going to be
Sorry,
a lot.
I have a question. Does Nana Home charge for the training? Is that another revenue stream? No, it's not.
No.
Okay. Could it charge in future for the training, you think?
Possibly. I think that one of the things that's happening that these marketplaces can do a really, really good job of is my friend calls it, I think, quantum credentialing, right? Tiny certification classes, not a 2-year program. In their case, okay, it's a Samsung Model XYZ refrigerator. It takes maybe 2 days to learn how to fix just that one, and it's got a broken pump, right? So that's a 1-day thing to learn how to fix that. And you just build up more and more and more of those over time. And if you're really good and you figure out how to properly structure the data and make it nicely organized, you can have one of those for every single possible task that's going to happen. Now, this doesn't work well in software development, right? Software development, maybe someday it'll just be, click a bunch of buttons and magically assemble some software, but we're not there yet, right? So it has to be highly structured, and that you will make over time. I'm convinced it's just a better business to have highly qualified people that stick around for a really long time and do work on your platform, and people pay you for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, okay. So, sorry, I interrupted you earlier with it's a slightly sidetracked. We were saying, you kind of like this training side of Nanodesk, and then other areas.
Yeah. So the other thing that I think has been was always a big challenge in any of these labor marketplaces is most of them are really good at finding one person. We're not really good at magically assembling teams of people. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a big opportunity. I don't know that anybody's done it all that well yet, but I think that's a big opportunity, right? Because all these marketplaces work great if you need one person, but the real money is spent on hiring teams of 500 customer service reps or something. How do you do that? Mm-hmm. And I think that's a big opportunity, right? That's still dominated by massive BPOs all over the place. The other thing that I think is really exciting is more and more people are doing hybrid models, right? Lots of VCs like to get up on podcasts and stages and talk about how, that's not a real marketplace. You need to be asset light or something like that. It's like, well, okay, maybe. But if I'm really, really good at predicting demand and I understand exactly where it's going to be, I can employ a hybrid model. It's kind of like you said, you need some lever to be able to pull, but maybe you can fill 60% of items with W-2 employees. Mm-hmm. But a lot of the reason for the marketplace is that it's, fluctuating demand and, peak times and all those sort of things. And so you need both. Yeah. So I think that's going to happen more and more. And in my opinion, it's mostly the best of both worlds, right? The hybrid model can outperform either an asset light or an asset heavy one. It should be better. Now it's more complicated, right? That's the other nature of the beast is, these startups get more and more complicated over time. To keep adding more and more efficiency, you need to get more complicated.
Mm-hmm. Can I jump in just quickly? As we also more or less enter the last part of the conversation, maybe we can look a bit more into the future a little bit, just going beyond the practical advice for founders, which is the core of these conversations. But as we enter this kind of verticalization and we spoke also about geographic distribution and so on. What do you see in terms of new, and also let me piggyback on the hybrid discussion that you brought up, which to some extent signals an organizational evolution in marketplaces. No? So sometimes, they need to hire some people, so they need to craft different incentives for, independent professionals or maybe part of the organization. So can we to some extent, imagine that as we see more verticalization, more pervasive adoption of this model, that we really need to figure out a different way to do marketplaces that is slightly less centralized, much more, adaptable. So also challenging for brands to think themselves not just as a monolithic giant aggregation, and more like, maybe an experience that can be customized locally and with a lot of importance and freedom left to the actual entrepreneurs that maybe implemented the local nodes. And to some extent, this is what happened also with companies like Uber, no? That was largely the growth of Uber was largely due to the managers of the geographies, not of the new cities. So I'm wondering what's your feeling as you look into the marketplaces of the future to invest, if this is going to be something massively important to consider.
Yeah.
Also as an engine of growth, growing this way is going to be different than growing by centralizing, maybe.
Yeah, it sort of leads to a little bit of the discussion of kind of the creator economy type platforms, right? And I'm a big fan, unfortunately not an investor, but in Substack, right? And we used to have these big monolithic journalistic publications and stuff like that, and now everybody's saying, hey, wait a minute, I can do this on my own. And that is what's fueling the growth. And if you have one monolithic attempt at launching a publication, you sort of have one shot. Well, if you have 1,000 individuals that are all trying really hard to grow, that may be a much, much faster way to grow things. And I think you could see what's happening in journalism and arguably apply it to tons of different industries, right? In my industry, there's the rise of solo capitalists, right? It's like, well, actually, anyone can do this independently now. You don't really need the firm. And the reputation nowadays with all the social media platforms is always accruing to the individual, not the firm. And so that's a really interesting shift that I don't think has hit too many industries yet. But I fully expect it to grow. Legal's another big obvious one. I think there's a lot more.
Right. And I think you also touched upon this when you spoke about these learning platforms, learning aspects of platforms. More or less the switch is less marketplace aggregation, more empowerment, more enabling services for producers, that they can just manage their own demand generation and then connect directly with customers. So it's a bit like second order D2C, it's D2C also from the perspective of the producer. Yeah. And that I agree with you that this is extremely promising also because to some extent architecturally it's much easier to decentralize software as a service. We know how it's done with federation, like WordPress has been doing for ages now. Much more complex to decentralize a centralized marketplace, actually a place where everybody needs to find each other. These tentatives in decentralizing marketplaces have been done, but less effectively for sure. So I think I bring this with me as a part of this conversation, that we may see more like enabling platforms and less aggregation in the coming months and years as we conquer all these new spaces where marketplaces can work out.
And I think that you could try to do a thought experiment, right? Like, would it make sense for an Uber competitor to allow, myself to just be a private driver and people are actually hiring me and I'm building my own business as opposed to Uber? Well, maybe. I actually know some people that are trying it against things like Instacart and Corner Shop, but I think a lot of it depends on the service. Is it
the type of the service? Yeah.
Is it a commodity or more of a luxury type thing?
Obviously, yeah.
And I think the other thing that these individual creator economy platforms are going to enable is just a much steeper range of earning potential, right? Arguably, take venture capitalists. Like, the worst venture capitalists are way overpaid. The best venture capitalists are probably way underpaid. Same thing in programmers, journalists, podcasters, you name it. And I think these platforms will allow a much steeper earning trajectory. Now, you could also argue it creates a lot more income inequality, but I don't know if we want to end on that topic.
I mean, no, that's something that we touched upon also with James in previous podcasts. This Matthew effect that platforms obviously have, because they just make the best get better, and the more marginalized, unfortunately, lose opportunities. I think this is a matter of regulation and policy that definitely our policymakers need to keep in mind. But we cannot make a platform culpable to support those that are great at doing their work. So I think this is something that is in the radar of the conversations that we are having. Manfredi, do you have a final question, maybe, or maybe we want to let Josh to touch on a topic that maybe we didn't touch and you feel it's extremely important for our listeners?
Well, I do have a question, but if there's something like Josh would like to share, that's let's certainly leave it to him.
No, please fire away.
Please go with the question then.
Right. So we've talked about kind of metrics, ideas, markets, strategies, and then I guess when you invest, you also look at teams. What do you look for? What do you look at?
I do look at teams. So I have a bunch of thoughts about this. First of all, every single investor says we want great teams, right? Of course.
Nobody wants a bad team, it seems.
Nobody wants a bad team. My belief, though, is that maybe I'm good enough to identify the top 10%, but I know I'm not good enough to identify the top 1% among those 10%, right? It's hard. Like, what does that even mean? Like, is this team great or not? Well, it's really hard to define what that means. It's sort of easy once they've had $1 billion exit, but that's a little too late for us. So, first of all, I don't think we're nearly as good at assessing team as maybe we think we are. But what I look for usually is someone. First of all, there's an interesting observation. Most, I think, many of the very successful founders don't come from that particular industry because they have to come in and completely reinvent it with some new insight. And I'm a big believer in the whole Medici effect kind of thing, right? Like cross-pollinate tons of different industries, and then magic will happen. If you put, the same type of industry veteran in place as a new founder, well, they'll just do an incremental improvement. They won't do like a colossal change. And I'll give you one example. One of my investments is in a company called Lyte, Lyte. It's a ticketing platform. And what it took was an ad tech executive to move into the ticketing industry. And founder, CEO's name is Ant Taylor. He's fantastic. And he's completely reinventing how ticketing is done. And I think that's kind of what you need. Same thing. The founders of Alto Pharmacy had no experience in the pharmacy industry. None. They just thought it sucked and wanted to go fix it. And really the same thing with the ticketing. And so, when you find those teams that are definitely accomplished, maybe going after a completely different industry, but they have some really interesting gamble or bet or insight as to this is broken, this is how I can fix it. And when that is just a super clear statement, that's what I find usually works the best. So that's what I look for.
Right. Thanks. Do we have any questions from the audience?
No, not really. So maybe again we can choose this. We can have this option to, before we close, to just hear from you something that you really feel important.
For me, I think I love marketplaces. Reach out anytime. I'm Josh at Turtle Ventures, and I think just don't lose sight of the North Star. Increase efficiency, make users happy, on both sides, and you'll unlock the flywheel and have something special.
Actually, I do have sort of one final question, because as network effects are becoming better understood, we get more and more companies with network effects. So are they becoming less important than 10, 15 years ago? Or necessary? Like,
that's actually a great question. And, you know, I don't think I have a great answer, but it's a great observation, because, you know, everybody thought, oh, geez, you know, Facebook owns the social graph, so like no one can ever compete kind of thing. And then Clubhouse comes along, and, you know, there's obviously entrepreneurs are really clever. They figure out other ways to kind of hack these social graphs and things like that. And that's never going to change, right? Entrepreneurs are always going to be really clever and figure out hacks. So my opinion is, you know, I think you can't rest on your laurels, right? Like, you have one network effect, you know, you need to figure out the next one. And, you know, you just need to keep going and keep finding those compounding gains wherever you can. But, you know, I think there's something to, like, the old style network effects are sort of diminishing in importance. And maybe it's new things. Maybe it's more about, you know, super fast delivery or extremely high reliability. And the point of the network effect is to drive those things, as opposed to just connections. You know, now I know Manfredi, and that's like a simple network effect.
I mean, to some extent, we spoke about this when we spoke about this transition from marketplace aggregation to empowering producers, when we spoke about the inherent challenges as we move in the other 80% of the economy that still needs to be organized this way. Lots of these economies much more geographically dependent. So obviously network effects, as we call them, as we used to see them, are less important. And to some extent, I think sometimes when we speak about marketplaces, we tend to speak about the first generation of marketplaces, and the market has moved on widely, strongly, and now really the future is in different things. So thank you very much. I'm just wanted to share a quick update before we close for our listeners to remind them that next steps. Unfortunately, we don't have any webinar coming up. Josh is our grand finale, and on the summer we're gonna share some excerpt of our guide with new canvases that you can play with on metrics, on flywheels, on growth loops, and then wait for late summer, early fall. We're going to have our guide available in Credit Commons, as always available for everybody, and the training will probably come later on in the fall. So it was really great pleasure, and we really appreciate your availability, and I really encourage founders to reach out to you and learn from your story. I think it's always great to see people like you that are available to share and create this community of practice that I think is really important. So thank you very much again, Josh.
Thank you both. Enjoyed it. Take care.
Good to see you.
And for our listener, catch up soon.